economist at the Tresses Hedge Fund and author of many books, including Freedom or Equality. Daniel, it's been a long time. Great to see you.
Hi, great to see you, Paul.
Daniel, major U.S. stock indexes all in the green today. How are investors looking at these worsening trade tensions between the U.S. and China?
Obviously, there was a little bit of nervousness on Friday, and it came after markets had rallied so aggressively since the tariff tantrum. But in essence, what many people understand is that this is a negotiation, and that there are lots of media messages saying that China doesn't need the U.S. and that China can do whatever it wants. That is not true, and it's proven by the messages of the Chinese officials throughout the weekend, and also at the same time a lot of hype and a lot of negative messages about the Trump administration, saying that the Trump administration suddenly out of the blue implements tariffs. Everybody can see that this is a reaction to an uncalled and completely unnecessary measure from China. No? So I think that what we're seeing is basically the evidence of a negotiation in real time, and investors understand it. That's why today markets are seeing the strongest rally since May. No?
Yeah, indeed, Daniel. I think of anyone, investors keep their finger on the pulse of this type of thing and try and forecast these things. So really a lot of this has been priced in. But Daniel, regardless of how this latest tit for tat spat goes, do you see the U.S. and perhaps the rest of the free world moving faster to decouple from China? And if you do, what does that mean for investors?
Well, all this is proving that, unfortunately, the Chinese regime has not delivered on its promise to be a reliable and safe supplier. I think that everybody understands that the West cannot simply rely on China for rare earths and for essential components like chips. And that is a very unfortunate reality of an economy, the Chinese one, that has been closing instead of opening in the past 7 years in particular. So obviously, what is the number one thing that everybody understands? First, rare earths are not rare. There are plenty of them. So the thing that needs to be addressed from Western nations is the decision to develop those resources and do it quickly. Number two, technology. I think that everybody understands that supply chains cannot be so limited in some parts of the spectrum, like in the case of technology, and therefore that production of chips and that technology needs to be a lot more varied. So Scott Besson said it very, very clearly. We have understood that you just simply cannot rely on one single nation for the supply of essential components, because it's a matter of national security. So all of this is changing the entire landscape, and investors are looking for the next story. Everybody is looking at where is it going to be that can get the competitive advantage to deliver on the development of rare earths, to get a more flexible supply than what exists right now. And second, who is going to be the winner in the technology battle, and who is going to develop and build the chips that are going to, strengthen the competitive advantage of technology giants. Obviously, the bet right now is very simple. Everybody, or at least the vast majority of investors, are betting that it will be the very, very large US companies. And I think that that is one of the reasons why the move in the index is so concentrated on those 7 technology giants.
Well, Daniel, I'm somewhat glad that it's not just us in the news industry who has to watch these things so closely. You investors also are keeping your eye on these things too. Daniel, but after China ordered that significant restriction, you say they're not rare, but they are controlling a lot of the production of these rare earths. Trump said that China was weaponizing a monopoly that it's built up over years. But Trump also said that the U.S. has a monopoly positions much stronger and more far-reaching than China. What does Trump mean when he says that?
Well, basically, what he is saying is that China has shown to the world, and the world has finally understood, that China's Achilles heel is the enormity of the working capital challenge that exporters in China face if they don't sell to the United States. So what President Trump is basically saying is that without the United States and without the United States technology giants, China is playing a control game that only ends up backfiring and generating a domino effect that ends up hurting its exporters, its manufacturing sector, and also its citizens, because domestic demand, let's be fairly honest, in China is exceedingly weak. So I think that all of that is what President Trump is trying to say, that in terms of technology, in terms of market, in terms of the ability to get the origination of credit for the development of so many manufacturing and technology giants in China, all of that also needs the United States. Ultimately, what China has done is completely backfired on the government of China, because it's a very good word, weaponization of a monopoly. It's basically trying to force something that is going to generate a very negative effect. Think about this. Everyone understands that OPEC finally learned that it makes no sense to try to limit supply and bring the price of oil up. Why? Because immediately you get alternatives everywhere. And now we are seeing how OPEC is trying to present itself to the world as the reliable and competitive partner and trading associate. China is doing the opposite. China is actually hurting itself and shooting itself in the foot by weaponizing its monopoly on rare earths that anyone that looks at the world understands is not a monopoly, because it's something that can be quietly but very, very, very rapidly developed all over the world.
So Daniel, you're saying that China has this strong position in rare earths, and instead of using it to its advantage over the next few years or decades, what it's done now is shown its face to the world and said, well, we could weaponize this at any point. So now the United States or other countries are more likely to start developing these rare earths themselves and wearing away at China's competitive advantage, if I'm not mistaken. Daniel, I've got a few more minutes. I want to ask you about something interesting. An interesting take. We saw the price of gold hitting all-time highs. It was something you predicted on this show a long time ago. How does the price of gold rising play into this global reshuffling of trade relationships and central banking?
Oh, it's an absolutely critical part of it. What is basically happening is that central banks all over the world are abandoning quietly their exposure to European sovereign debt, to Japanese sovereign debt, if they have any, the UK sovereign debt, and US sovereign debt, and purchasing more gold. So it's basically a rebalancing of the asset base of central banks. Central banks want more gold as the asset that is going to give them stability and a real economic return, and reducing their exposure to sovereign debt. This is critical because it's part of the decision to try to reduce the dependency on the US dollar. However, when we look at China, for example, yes, the central bank is reducing its exposure to the US dollar and increasing its exposure to gold. But the problem is that the Chinese economy is getting into more dollar-denominated debt, so its dependency on the US dollar is not diminishing. In essence, the quest to increase gold in the balance sheet of central bank is the evidence that developed economies have lost the confidence of global investors in terms of the stability and the strength of their sovereign debt. People see what's happening in Japan, what's happening in France, what's happening in the UK, and what could happen in the US if the negotiations to cut spending are not achieved. And they say, hey, we don't believe in the solvency of sovereign debt. Therefore, we want more gold.
Incredible. So we see these central banks, including China, trying to reduce their dependency on the U.S. and perhaps hurt the U.S., but in the end, it's easier said than done. Daniel Akai at the Treasuries Hedge Fund. Daniel, thank you so much. Talk soon.
Thank you very much, Paul. Have a good day.
And still to come, all 16 victims in a Tennessee factory explosion have been identified, according to authorities. Why they say the investigation could take a long